Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. We always get into the really interesting stuff like the relationship between creativity and mental illness.
Yeah, those brilliant minds.
Artists, writers, scientists, always wondering, is there a connection between those incredible abilities and the struggles that they face?
Right.
And this time we are focusing on J. Robert Oppenheimer,
I was going to say, who are we looking at this week?
the father of the atomic bomb.
Oh, yeah.
And our deep dive is into American Prometheus,
Oh,
the Pulitzer Prize-winning biography.
Oh, perfect.
We're going to see if Oppenheimer fits into that mad genius mold.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
So to kick things off, let's jump right in with this story from Oppenheimer's early years, something that really sets the stage for us.
Okay.
We're talking about when he was a student at Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant, but really battling depression.
Oh.
Left a poisoned apple on his tutor's desk.
Oh, wow.
Like, talk about chilling, right?
Yeah.
Almost Shakespearean.
Absolutely. And it kind of foreshadows some of the things that we're going to uncover as we explore his life.
Yeah, and it makes you think about that act.
Mm-hmm.
The depth of despair,
Yeah.
the darkness that was there alongside his brilliance.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, was this darkness, this inner turmoil, was it intertwined with his genius? Was it a source of his creativity or a consequence of it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, a big question. And this book, American Prometheus, definitely gives us a lot to think about.
It does. And just to understand a little bit more about his background, Oppenheimer was born into a wealthy intellectual Jewish family in New York City.
Yeah, so very privileged, but also a sheltered upbringing.
And even though he did well academically, he also was kind of melancholy.
Yeah, there's that shadow lurking, even with all the privilege and intellectual stimulation.
And there's this great story from the book about a young Oppenheimer at summer camp devouring Middlemarch by George Eliot
Oh, wow.
while he was being bullied.
Okay, so the intellectual depth is obviously there, but also maybe a sense of not fitting in.
Like isolation almost, right?
Exactly.
So is this like a recurrent theme that we see in a lot of geniuses?
His feeling of being an outsider. Yeah, we see it often, and it can be both a source of creativity, but it can also trigger anxiety and depression.
Interesting. So it's like this double-edged sword.
Yeah, feeling different can lead to those unique perspectives and innovative thinking, but it can also breed loneliness and insecurity.
And it feels like this is with Oppenheimer throughout his life,
Mm-hmm.
even at Harvard,
Right.
where he thrives academically. He's still struggling with these bouts of severe depression.
Yeah, and the book actually quotes him describing himself as an unctuous, repulsively good little boy, not ready for how harsh the world is.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of sad, but it shows that there's this insecurity under all of that intellectual power.
Like he felt almost guilty for his privilege.
Maybe.
Like it didn't prepare him for the world's suffering.
That's an interesting thought. And then you add in his intense intellectual curiosity, and maybe you see how both his drive for knowledge and his inner turmoil were fueled.
Yeah, like these two forces inside of him,
Yeah.
pushing him forward, but also pulling him back.
Right. And I think we see this even more as he gets deeper into physics.
So after Harvard, he goes on to study with like the big names.
Yeah, Niels Bohr, Wolfgang Pauli.
And he quickly makes a name for himself in quantum physics.
Yeah.
Publishing all these groundbreaking papers, developing new math to solve these complex problems.
All while still battling his inner demons.
It's hard to imagine.
It really is.
Like he's grappling with these huge concepts that change how we understand the universe.
Right.
And at the same time, dealing with all this internal struggle.
It makes you wonder, were those struggles connected to his genius in some way? Did that depth of thinking, his ability to go into the complexities of the universe, maybe that also made him more open to that darkness inside?
Yeah, and it's something that we'll keep exploring as we learn more about his life and his work.
Definitely.
But before we do that, there's another piece of this puzzle that we need to talk about.
Okay, what's that?
Oppenheimer's search for peace and solace in the New Mexico desert.
Ah, yes. His ranch, Perro Caliente. It keeps coming up in American Prometheus. And it seems like it was more than just a place to go on vacation.
Like a sanctuary almost.
Yeah, a place for him to really think about these big ideas alone.
It seems like he needed that vastness, the emptiness of the desert, to match the expansiveness of his mind.
It's an interesting thought, and we'll be right back to talk about how that New Mexican landscape really shapes Oppenheimer's journey as he steps onto the world stage. So we were just talking about Oppenheimer's ranch in New Mexico, Perro Caliente.
Yeah, like how it was more than just a place to escape.
Right, it seemed like he found some real solace out there. And a sense of grounding. American Prometheus talks about how much he loved the New Mexico landscape, all that stark beauty.
I think the book even mentioned that he learned to ride horses out there.
Really?
Yeah, and like rode horses through the canyons. Pretty different image than you picture when you think about a theoretical physicist, right?
Yeah, definitely not the stereotype, but it shows a side of him that we don't always think about. Like, he needed that physical connection with the world, a way to balance all that intense intellectual stuff.
And wasn't he really into Eastern philosophy and mysticism too?
Oh, yeah, he was. And, that emphasizes the connection between everything. So it makes sense that he'd be drawn to nature.
So it's like the ranch let him be all these different parts of himself at the same time.
Right.
He could be the physicist working on these huge universal mysteries, and a nature lover exploring the canyons, and someone exploring Eastern philosophy.
Yeah, all in the same place. And I think understanding all those sides of him is really important when we think about his journey, especially as he becomes the leader of the Manhattan Project.
Talk about intense.
I know, right?
The world is at war, and he's got this huge responsibility to lead this team of brilliant minds, and they have to develop this weapon that's more powerful than anything anyone has ever seen before.
It's mind-blowing.
Do you think he was ready for that?
Yeah.
Like that level of responsibility?
From what American Prometheus says, it seems like he was both excited and scared at the same time. Like, he knew how serious it all was and what could happen if they succeeded. But there's also this sense that he was energized by how intense it was. Like, it was this chance to use all his brain power and leadership skills for something this huge.
It's that whole thing about genius and pressure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, did having all that responsibility, maybe even the potential for disaster, did that actually push him to be even more creative?
That's a really good question. I mean, some people would just fall apart with that much pressure, but others, like Oppenheimer, maybe they thrive on it. It's like the stakes have to be incredibly high to get them going.
And it wasn't just about him being smart.
No.
He had to manage a whole team of these super smart scientists.
And, they were all brilliant. And some of them were pretty eccentric, too.
How did he even handle that?
The book makes him sound like this really charismatic leader, like someone who could really inspire people, get them to work together. He created this sense of unity and purpose. Even with all the secrecy and pressure, there are stories about him giving lectures and leading discussions late into the night just to keep that intellectual energy going.
So he wasn't just a scientific genius. He was also a really good manager.
Exactly. And those skills were so important to the success of the Manhattan Project. He had to bring together all these different personalities and keep them focused on the mission.
But the book also doesn't shy away from the moral struggles he was going through.
Oh, yeah.
He knew how dangerous this thing they were building was.
Right. And there's that really powerful moment after the Trinity test where he's thinking about that line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
That's chilling.
I know. It shows how conflicted he was inside. He helped create something that could wipe out civilization, and he had to live with that. The book makes it seem like that burden and the politics that came later really affected him in the years after the war.
So we're back, talking about J. Robert Oppenheimer, trying to figure out if the Mad Genius label really fits.
And we're at this turning point in his life after World War II, the start of the Cold War, Oppenheimer's role in the atomic bomb. It made her famous, but it also really messed things up for him.
American Prometheus really paints this picture of him as a public figure, a science celebrity advising the government. But at the same time, he's wrestling with what the bomb means ethically.
It's crazy, right? He's the guy who made this terrifying weapon, but he's also the one saying, hey, we need to be careful with this stuff.
It's like he's calling for international control diplomacy, even though the Cold War is heating up.
Yeah, talk about brave, especially with all the Red Scare stuff going on.
And Oppenheimer had been involved with some left-leaning groups in the past, so people started looking at him suspiciously.
Right, and then he comes out against the hydrogen bomb.
Which didn't make him any friends in the government.
Especially Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb. He saw Oppenheimer as a roadblock.
It's tragic. Like, the hero who saves the day gets torn down by the people he helped.
And the security clearance hearing was like the final blow.
American Prometheus really lays out how unfair that whole thing was.
Totally.
I mean, here's this guy devoted his whole life to science, to his country, and they put him through this interrogation questioning his loyalty.
It's tough to read about him trying to explain himself, his past, his beliefs.
But the political climate had changed, and his enemies, they wanted him out.
And they got what they wanted. His security clearance revoked, basically ended his government career.
It's like they destroyed his reputation.
Yeah, a huge blow, professionally and personally. But what's amazing is that American Prometheus shows he didn't just give up.
He kept teaching, writing, stayed involved in science, even became this wise figure reflecting on what the atomic age meant and what scientists are responsible for.
He could have easily become bitter and withdrawn, but he chose to stay engaged with the world.
It's inspiring.
It really is shows you can get back up even after being knocked down.
His story is so relevant today as we're dealing with new tech like AI and genetic engineering.
Right, we need to remember what happened in the atomic age, think ethically, and make sure scientists speak up when they need to.
Oppenheimer's life was full of brilliance and tragedy. He showed us both the potential and the danger of scientific progress. American Prometheus really gives us a deep look at this complicated guy and makes us think about genius and the ethical questions we face today.
It's a book that stays with you, makes you think about what we're doing in this world that's so shaped by science.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Oppenheimer's life. We hope you'll check out American Prometheus.
We'd love to hear what you think too, so join us on social media and share your thoughts.
Until next time, keep those brilliant minds working and never stop asking questions, exploring and searching for the truth.
Thanks for listening to the Mad Genius Thesis. We'll be back next week with another look at the minds that shaped our world.